A nation divided, the U.S. and the path to war. The journey to America's involvement in World War II was a complex and tumultuous one, marked by intense debates and conflicting ideologies. As the 1930s drew to a close, the world watched with bated breath as the flames of war erupted in Europe. The continent was engulfed in chaos, with nations falling one by one to the relentless advance of Axis powers. The horrors of the First World War, still fresh in the collective memory, cast a long shadow over the United States. The brutal trench warfare, the staggering loss of life, and the psychological scars left an indelible mark on the American psyche. Many Americans, weary of foreign entanglements, clung fiercely to a policy of isolationism. The sentiment was strong. The desire to avoid another devastating conflict was deeply rooted in the national consciousness. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, acutely aware of the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, faced an uphill battle in swaying public opinion. He understood the necessity of preparing the nation for the possibility of war, yet he had to tread carefully amidst a populace largely opposed to intervention. The specter of war loomed large, but the prevailing sentiment in America was one of neutrality. The nation was still grappling with the Great Depression, and many believed that their focus should remain on domestic recovery rather than foreign conflicts. The scars of the Great War ran deep, and the desire to avoid another costly conflict was palpable. Memorials and veterans served as constant reminders of the sacrifices made, reinforcing the resolve to stay out of European affairs. The America First movement gained traction, advocating for non-intervention in foreign wars. Prominent figures and everyday citizens alike rallied behind the cause, emphasizing the need to prioritize American interests and avoid being drawn into another overseas conflict. However, the escalating aggression of the Axis powers, particularly the brutal Nazi conquest of Europe, gradually shifted public opinion. The relentless march of Nazi troops and the subjugation of entire nations could not be ignored. The atrocities committed by Hitler's regime shook the conscience of many Americans, making it increasingly difficult to ignore the moral imperative to intervene. Reports of concentration camps and the systematic extermination of millions of people highlighted the stark reality of the threat posed by the Axis powers, compelling the United States to reconsider its stance on neutrality. A helping hand Lend-Lease and the shift in policy. Despite the strong isolationist sentiment, President Roosevelt recognized the growing danger posed by the Axis powers. He understood that the survival of democracy itself was at stake. In March 1941, the U.S. Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act, a pivotal piece of legislation that allowed the United States to provide material aid to countries deemed vital to its national defense. The Lend-Lease program marked a significant departure from strict neutrality. It provided a lifeline to Great Britain, which was facing the full might of the Nazi war machine. American ships loaded with weapons, ammunition, and other essential supplies braved the treacherous waters of the Atlantic, delivering their precious cargo to the beleaguered British Isles. The Lend-Lease Act was a testament to the growing realization that the fate of the United States was inextricably linked to the outcome of the war in Europe. It was a clear signal to the Axis powers that American support for the Allies was more than just rhetorical. A day of infamy, Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. enters the war. The debate over American involvement in the war came to a shuddering halt on December 7, 1941. On that fateful Sunday morning, Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. naval base in Hawaii. The attack, a calculated act of aggression intended to cripple the American Pacific Fleet, had the opposite effect. The images of the burning battleships and the stories of the American servicemen who lost their lives in the attack galvanized the nation. The date, which will live in infamy, as President Roosevelt famously declared, shattered any lingering illusions of isolationism. The following day, December 8, 1941, the United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies in the Axis powers, declared war on the United States. America was now fully engaged in a global conflict that would test its resolve and its spirit like never before. Section 4. The Arsenal of Democracy, Mobilizing for a Global Conflict. With the declaration of war, the United States underwent a profound transformation. The nation, which had been hesitant to join the global conflict, now found itself fully committed to the war effort. The nation that had been deeply divided over involvement in foreign conflicts was now united in its determination to defeat the Axis powers. Patriotic fervor swept across the country, bringing together people from all walks of life. From coast to coast, Americans rallied to the cause, enlisting in the armed forces, working in factories and supporting the war effort on the home front. Men and women alike answered the call to serve, whether on the battlefield or in the factories. The American economy, spurred by government spending and wartime production, shifted into high gear. Factories operated around the clock, producing the materials needed to support the troops overseas. Factories that once produced consumer goods were retooled to manufacture tanks, planes, ships, and other war materials. This massive industrial effort was crucial to the Allied victory. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, filling the jobs left vacant by men fighting overseas. They took on roles that had traditionally been reserved for men, proving their capability and resilience. The war effort touched every aspect of American life. Communities organized scrap drives, collected materials for recycling, and participated in war bond drives to support the financial needs of the war. Rationing became a fact of life as the government imposed restrictions on food, gasoline, and other essential commodities. Citizens were encouraged to grow victory gardens to supplement their food supply. Families gathered around their radios to listen to news from the front lines, their hearts filled with both pride and anxiety for the loved ones serving overseas. The radio became a vital link to the outside world, providing updates and boosting morale. War bond rallies were held across the nation, with celebrities and public figures urging citizens to buy bonds to support the war effort. This financial support was crucial in funding the massive military expenditures. As American soldiers boarded ships bound for Europe and the Pacific, they carried with them the hopes and prayers of a nation united in purpose. The collective effort of the American people played a pivotal role in the eventual victory. Section 5. A two-front war triumphs and tribulations in Europe and the Pacific. The United States faced formidable challenges in fighting a two-front war against powerful and determined enemies. In Europe, American forces joined their British and Canadian allies in the fight against Nazi Germany. The D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, marked a turning point in the war, as Allied forces gained a foothold on the European continent and began the long and arduous task of liberating France and pushing back the German army. In the Pacific, the United States waged a brutal island-hopping campaign against Japan. From the Battle of Midway to the Battle of Iwo Jima, American forces displayed extraordinary courage and resilience in the face of fierce Japanese resistance. The war in the Pacific was characterized by its ferocity and its toll on both military personnel and civilians. The battles for islands like Guadalcanal, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima were among the most brutal of the entire war. Section 6. Victory at last, the end of World War II, and its aftermath. After years of bitter fighting and unimaginable sacrifices, the war finally came to an end in 1945. In Europe, the war ended with the unconditional surrender of Germany on May 8, 1945, following the suicide of Adolf Hitler and the capture of Berlin by Soviet forces. In the Pacific, the war ended with the surrender of Japan on August 15, 1945, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The use of atomic bombs remains one of the most controversial decisions in history, but it brought a swift end to the war and spared the need for a costly invasion of Japan. The world emerged from World War II a very different place. The war had claimed the lives of an estimated 40 to 85 million people, leaving countless others wounded, displaced, and traumatized. Section 7. A New World Order, the Legacy of American Involvement. The United States emerged from World War II as a global superpower, its economy booming and its military might unmatched. The war had transformed the nation, pulling it out of the Great Depression and into an era of unprecedented prosperity and technological advancement. But the war's legacy was far more complex than simply a victory for the United States. The devastation in Europe and Asia left a power vacuum that the US and the Soviet Union were eager to fill, leading to a new era of geopolitical tension. The war had profound and lasting consequences for the entire world, shaping the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. The Marshall Plan, for instance, was a massive American initiative to aid Western Europe, which helped to rebuild economies and prevent the spread of Soviet influence. One of the most significant outcomes of the war was the formation of the United Nations in 1945. This new international body aimed to foster peace and cooperation among nations, a direct response to the failures of the League of Nations. The UN was founded on the principle of collective security, with the goal of preventing future wars and promoting international cooperation. It provided a platform for dialogue and negotiation, hoping to resolve conflicts before they could escalate. The United States played a leading role in the establishment of the UN and has remained a key member ever since. American diplomats were instrumental in drafting the UN Charter, and the U.S. has hosted the UN headquarters in New York City. The war also marked the beginning of the Cold War, a period of intense geopolitical rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. This era was characterized by a constant threat of nuclear war, espionage, and a race for technological and ideological supremacy. The two superpowers, once allies in the fight against Nazi Germany, now found themselves locked in an ideological struggle for global dominance. This rivalry would shape international relations for the next several decades, influencing conflicts and alliances around the world.